let's get started. So a friend of a friend, about a week ago, well, I guess a few months ago now, since I wrote this in December, but about a week ago when I wrote this, got really mad at Lonerbox, seemingly out of nowhere. I was curious about it, I guess, so I did what any genuinely curious person looking for compelling content for their YouTube channel would do. I asked what was going on. And I was told, in no uncertain terms, that Lonerbox is a genocide-denying transphobe and he needed to be removed from the leftist community. That seemed odd to me. I've watched Lonerbox's videos and he seems reasonably progressive. Has a pretty good head on his shoulders. He's a little bit of a shitlord, but, I'm the guy who makes up a new reason for being banned from Twitter every video. I'm the guy who expects you to take me seriously in spite of the fact that I constantly brag about how good I am at lying. Who the hell am I to judge in that regard? So I asked this person in a shared chat that we were both in what video they were referring to. And they told me, it wasn't a video. It was a Twitch stream. And I fucking hate Twitch. Truly I do. Truly I do. Take how much it seems like I hate Twitter from how much I shit-talk Twitter, and that is how much I hate Twitch. By my estimation, which I will wholly admit is subjective, Twitch is nothing but a repository of useless garbage. It is an endless barrage of relitigating questions that have already been answered, of arguing over minute differences in thought process or opinion with inappropriate hostility and aggression, and self-important interpersonal drama that just the thought of bores me to tears. And also, people playing video games or being women in hot tubs, I guess. I don't see any value in that. So when someone tells me, somebody said something mean on Twitch, I just roll my eyes. I can't even help it. People can, and they do, make up all kinds of logic traps and dog whistles in order to make what they're talking about not actually be what they're talking about. For example, the cool and hip new thing in the UK is to ask if it's transphobic to say that only women can have a cervix. As though the thing that they want to solve is whether or not it's okay to say that only women can have a cervix. It is baffling and hostile to even people who understand these things quite well. So there are very good reasons to not take things seriously when they show up on Twitch. And most of the time, that's what I choose to do, not take them seriously. But this I can milk for content for my YouTube channel. And after watching both videos where Lonerbox talks to poly people, it seems to me that Lonerbox's objection is entirely semantic. He has a specific focus on clarity of language. And if that's his only objection, friends, enemies, assorted potted plants. I can make a counter-argument against that. In fact, I'll make 3. From what I would consider the most effective argument to what I would consider the least effective argument. So I say that Lonerbox's only objection is one of semantics, but it's just a hair more complicated than that. Lonerbox seems to define genocide as necessarily requiring mass murder. To define it in any other way cheapens the effect of the word. And because Lonerbox has not seen evidence of mass murders of trans people here in the United States, he is not willing to call what is happening here a genocide. Vitally, he appears to be willing to state that the far right is preparing for a genocide, but not that they are currently enacting one. For the purposes of this argument, we will very kindly set aside the evidence of increasing hostility and violence towards trans people, up to and including murders. At least for the moment. We will also set aside the increasingly hostile rhetoric that has led to this violence against trans people, up to and including calling for laws that specifically discriminate against trans people. We will do this for several reasons. The second reason is that I'm just willing to take Lonerbox at his word. These incidents of violence against trans people are not widely publicized. I know about them because I work with organizations that help track them. And if most of these incidents are not widely publicized, if the public at large does not know about them, then the idea that rhetoric is already leading to violence seems outrageous on its face. I will grant that. The third reason is because whether or not Lonerbox is being honest is functionally irrelevant. It would not change the arguments that I make, just how I might argue them. For those that didn't catch it right away, there is a primary, most effective reason, but that's part of another argument. Stick a pin in it. Here is what I believe the most effective counter-argument I have to Lonerbox's concerns about semantics is. Saying that a genocide is happening and saying that a genocide is going to happen are functionally identical. They are making different claims, but they are doing the same thing. More specifically, if someone claims that a genocide is happening right now, they are asking for intervention to prevent needless pain, suffering, and death. If someone claims that a genocide is going to happen in the near future, they are asking for intervention in order to prevent needless pain, suffering, and death. They are asking for the same things. Let me make a comparison for you. If someone is being held at gunpoint, and that person says to you, "By Jove, this ruffian intends to shoot me with his gun!" They are giving you the same information as they would if they were saying, "This ruffian has shot me with his gun!" They are saying that there is another person armed with a deadly weapon and seemingly possessed with intent to use it against them. If and when they have been shot, their condition has changed. They are in need of medical attention, they have been injured, and consequently, they are in much more danger. But vitally, their relationship to the person who is holding them at gunpoint has not changed. And even more than that, stripped down even further, do you really believe, should we really argue, that the determining factor in whether or not you move to help someone who is being held at gunpoint, do you believe the determining factor for that should be whether or not that person has been shot? No, even that's going too far. Do you really believe, are you going to argue that the determining factor for whether or not you should call the police be whether or not someone has been shot? Surely you hear how absurd that sounds. I think the bottom of the thing is this. When people tell you that they are in danger, when people tell you that they are being threatened, you take them at least seriously enough to look at the claims that they're making on their terms. Because we respect people and their autonomy. So there's this well-known series of screen caps, 4chan green text meme, where Jimmy Neutron gets excoriated for describing table salt as sodium chloride. Vitally, he is excoriated not because he's wrong, but because the nomenclature that he uses makes him impossible to understand. And actually, my favorite version of this meme is this one, where it points out that even though he's technically correct, he is literally wrong. Table salt is much more complicated than just sodium and chloride. So, here's the rub. Sometimes being more clear and concise in your language literally makes you harder to understand. There are different kinds of language that are appropriate for different kinds of scenarios. An expert in one's field will speak to another expert in their field differently than they would a layperson. And that has nothing to do with intelligence or lack thereof. If someone plays WoW all day, or if someone is heavily invested in and knows a great deal about, YouTube drama, then they will necessarily have a higher baseline of knowledge about that thing than an ordinary person, someone who is not invested in these things would. Scientists will discuss science in a very different way with other scientists than they would with people who are not familiar with science. Doctors talk about medicine in a very different way with other doctors than they do with people who are not doctors. That's why at the end of every episode of House or another doctor has to break down in very simple and very great detail exactly what happened to the patient and how they're going to cure it. Law and lawyers have their own obtuse, self-referential language that even a lot of lawyers don't really understand. Even more than that, though, all language is referential and contextual. And I can prove it. I want you to do something for me. I want you to actually do this for me. I want you to tell me what the weather is like. Go on. Leave a comment. Yeah. It could be worse. As I was writing this, I was under a tornado warning. But I have a follow-up question. Why did you not tell me what the weather was like in Nairobi, Kenya? And this isn't a trick question. It isn't a puzzle. The answer is as obvious as it seems. You didn't tell me what the weather was like in Nairobi because that's not what I asked. There was no indication, contextually, implicitly, or directly, that I was interested in knowing what the weather was like in Nairobi. It is entirely irrelevant to both you and me. Unless, you live in Nairobi, Kenya? In which case, I apologize for using your city as a synonym for bumfuck Egypt. And I didn't need to explain that. You understood that implicitly. And not everyone has that sense of implicit understanding. One of the telltale signs of autism is that implicit understanding of the context of language is not always present. Speaking as an autistic person, there are things that I still don't get, and that I don't always understand. I'm told, for example, that I come off as both smug and hostile, and my experience is that this is true regardless of how much or how little I try to account for that. No, seriously, other people who make videos on YouTube, more successfully than I do, have told me in good faith, not mocking me, not belittling me, that the main thing that keeps my channel from getting bigger is that I always sound smug and hostile. All of this adds an additional layer, or 3 layers, to this conversation that we're having about clarity of language. Someone saying, for example, I'm gonna go make some chicken nuggets, is very different from someone saying, I'm going to make some chicken nuggets! Yeah. Same words, very different. Someone saying, for example, oh no! He's dead! Is very different from someone saying, oh no, he's dead. So when we're talking about clarity of language, does that mean using tone and cadence more carefully? Or does it mean not using it at all? All 6 people who watch my videos will be able to tell you I'm quite animated when I talk. When we're talking about clarity of language, does that mean that I have to be more careful in how I gesture and use my hands? Or does it mean that I don't use them at all? And if you are saying that we have to eliminate tone and cadence, you are saying that we need to remove body language, then what you are saying is that in order for someone to be taken seriously, they need to look and sound like Hannibal Lecter. And quite frankly, I think that shit is just unreasonable. And here's the bottom of the second thing. If your prescription that people need to be more clear in their language makes them harder to understand, you're doing the thing wrong. Hey, it's my thing. It's the thing I tell people. There is a specific aspect of online debate culture that I find intensely frustrating. I would go so far as to say that it is the most frustrating aspect of debate bro culture in general, at least for me. And that is conversations around the age of consent. These discussions, at least the ones I have seen and participated in, are deeply unserious and borderline predatory. Sometimes they veer straight into predatory territory. I'm sure that you've seen clips of Matt Walsh or Tucker Carlson talking about how badly they want to bone on some 15-year-old girl, and why that's okay, actually. I'm not here to relitigate those specific allegations, although they exist and you should probably look them up. Rather, the thing that drives me up the wall, the thing that drives me to teeth-gnashing rage, is how these conversations are had. A person who is serious about protecting children from predation, a person who is serious about the health and well-being of children, will center a conversation about children on and around children. That is not how these conversations go. All the discussions about age of consent that I've seen, that I have participated in, have generally devolved into grown-ass men talking about how to protect themselves from the sexual mores of preteens. I cannot stress this strongly enough. Not once, not ever have I seen one of these discussions about age of consent discuss how a law would affect children, except in whether or not it would allow children to be sexualized at all. No, these conversations that are being had by grown-ass men always devolve into grown-ass men discussing whether or not a law would or would not allow them to potentially predate children. There is a thing that I feel the need to stress. No one is going to look you in your eyes and tell you, no, we're not actually talking about this thing. This thing is a pretext to talk about another thing entirely. But if you use your wits, if you use your critical thinking skills and pay attention, you can suss it out on your own. Let me give you an example. If someone talks about crime, if they talk about how terrible crime is for their community and the need to stop crime, but they only talk about stopping petty crimes like loitering or shoplifting, and they never even acknowledge the existence of white-collar crime, you can infer that this person has no interest in punishing people for committing crimes. They want to punish people for being poor. Another example, if someone claims they believe in freedom of speech, believe in the importance of it to keep social cohesion, but every time they have the opportunity to use their freedom of speech, they talk about how important it is to be able to question the Holocaust, how many people died and how they died, then you can infer those people are not interested in freedom of speech, they're just Holocaust deniers. And if a person or group talks about protecting children from predation, but the examples they give of that predation are bog-standard sex ed or LGBTQ people existing in the same space as children in any capacity, and the prescriptions that they give are not to protect children, but are explicitly and deliberately to punish and discriminate against LGBTQ people, you don't need to be a genius-level logician to figure out that they are not interested in protecting children. They just want to punish people for not being straight. I said before when I was setting up my arguments that I had a primary reason, a very good reason, for taking Lonerbox seriously when he said that his arguments were mostly semantic. Even told him to put a pin in it. We're pulling that pin now. The reason that I'm willing to take Lonerbox seriously, the primary reason, is that his claims line up with the face value claims of people like Matt Walsh and Tucker Carlson and the LGB Alliance. And that's not exactly a criticism. You should do that. You should take these arguments at face value up to a point. When you are approached with an argument, at least initially, it is entirely necessary to take that argument in the terms that it is given. That's one of the reasons that when someone tells you they are in danger, you take them seriously. You analyze it on their terms. But at some point, when you're listening to these transphobic bigots, the dissonance between their stated goals and the things that they actually want to do should become apparent. You've been tricked, lied to, bamboozled. And that is what makes this the weakest argument. You have to convince the person who's listening to the argument that they've been tricked. And people don't like doing that. People instinctively push back against that. And I say that without moral judgment. I'm not telling you that anyone is a bad person for not wanting to be wrong. It's just a thing that people do. It's a thing that it's known that people do. People don't like admitting that they are wrong. People don't like admitting that they were lied to or tricked. But sometimes you have to. Nobody likes eating humble pie, but you have to eat the humble pie sometimes. That's how you grow. I expect the more, and I say this with as little kindness as possible, I expect the more rational types to be saying, "Motherfucker, you've lost the plot. I thought that we were talking about whether or not genocide was an appropriate term to describe what's happening to trans people in the US and whether or not there was violence happening." And to be clear, we are. But, question. What side of this debate is it that keeps insisting on this exacting use of language? What side is it that keeps demanding this exacting use of language that denies culpability for acts of sarcastic terror? Which side is it that keeps demanding the use of more and more exacting, more and more specific language that muddies the issue of what is even happening or who it is happening to? Which side of this debate is saying that we don't need to take acts of violence seriously? Do you remember the implication? And this is absolutely not a both sides issue. I have watched videos the length of some documentary series talking about the allegations of grooming, where these allegations are coming from, and why they don't hold up to scrutiny. And they're being made by the people who are being accused of grooming. Meanwhile, Matt Walsh is over here saying, "When I said that Boston Children's Hospital was sterilizing and mutilating children, I didn't say that we should bomb them. I didn't say that out loud. I just thought it really loud while winking at the camera. Wink, wink. Totally different, guys. Totally different. Also, now we should kill the homeless." There is no amount of charity you can give these people. There is no amount of steel manning you can do for their arguments that will make their arguments anything but deception and deflection. You don't even need to take my word for it. If you listen to them for long enough, they will just tell you what they want. And that's not unique to them. That's true of everyone, in my experience. Even the most practiced and skillful of liars, wink wink, will tell you what they want if you shut your fucking mouth and listen to them for about half an hour. They may not tell you directly, they may not tell you explicitly, but if you use your noggin, if you have critical thinking skills and good listening skills, you'll be able to figure it out. That's not to say that if you can't figure it out, you don't have critical thinking skills. In my experience, everyone has critical thinking skills, to some degree. People aren't stupid. People see something happening and are able to attribute an effect to that. The pen fell down because somebody dropped it. What I would suggest, very gently in this context, is that if you can't suss this out, it might be because you're not using your critical thinking skills. And rather than make any prescriptivist arguments on that regard, I will end this much longer than I intended video, like this. The bottom of the thing. Not just the bottom of this last, mostly ineffective argument, but the bottom of all three arguments. The bottom of the bottom, if you will, is this. You have two mutually exclusive claims. One by fascists, one by LGBTQ people. The fascists are claiming that LGBTQ people are grooming children into their lifestyle. They are claiming that they are sterilizing and mutilating and terrorizing children. And you have the LGBTQ people saying that no, it's the fascists who are terrorizing and mutilating children, but they're doing it to trans children. And the LGBTQ people, they're hosting fundraisers for places like Mermaids and the Trevor Project, groups that advocate for trans people, and they're advocating for trans people on their behalf. This community is showing up to places where they would be expected to show up and showing children who are like them that the people around them will be accepting of them, understanding of them, compassionate towards them. The fascists are threatening to show up to these places with guns and shoot everyone there, including children. In some cases, they are showing up and shooting everyone there, including children. And there is a very important question that needs to be asked. Which one of these groups, the fascists or the LGBTQ community, which one of them is acting like they want to protect children? And perhaps more importantly, contextually, which one of these groups is acting like they want to inflict wanton, needless violence against people who they do not consider to be pure enough? Hey, Ron here again with some post-editing comments and some housekeeping. It is 5:30 in the afternoon on Friday here, and I am in a bit of a hurry, so no face for this bit. You're just gonna have to watch me play a game I like in the worst way possible. The likes and the comments are exactly where they always are. Leave one or both if you enjoyed the video. Or if you didn't enjoy it, leave a dislike and tell me why you didn't. Ko-Fi is also in the description if you have a couple of dollars to spare and think that this was so great you want to retroactively have paid for it. No pressure, though. Just to head off some comments I would expect, I am aware Lonerbox wrote at length about what he was trying to say and how he feels he was maliciously misinterpreted. I will admit that I have not read this document in full. I skimmed it, and it seems to be mostly the kind of self-important interpersonal drama that I want to stay away from. I also feel compelled to state that I worked diligently to avoid misinterpreting Lonerbox throughout the process of making this video. My criticism isn't even of Lonerbox. The video is ultimately about how the semantic arguments TERFs use are entirely made in bad faith and how to determine that. First, the semantic argument itself is semantic. Second, the semantic argument can and often does make communication more difficult. And lastly, that the actual policies and proposals that TERFs propose don't line up with their semantic complaints. Really, Lonerbox was just a convenient example of a different and difficult to describe phenomenon I'm probably going to talk about at length in several more videos. I said at the end of the video I wasn't going to make any prescriptive arguments in this video, but I have been writing about this at great length as of late. If you stick around, you're going to hear about it. On a more personal note, my yearly family emergency that I have to leave house to go help with came early this year. I won't go into detail because that's not your business, but I have some family members that are having an emergency and I'm going to go help them with that. I'm going to try and make videos while I'm away from home, but odds are they'll be much lower quality than this. I'll be making them with my phone if I'm able to make them at all. And I don't know how long I'll be gone. Maybe a couple of weeks, maybe longer. Probably longer. They're in bad trouble. One thing goes wrong and then everything goes wrong. That's always how things end up. I'm going to try and keep releasing videos to get myself back into the algorithm, but please do remember that I am very bad at keeping promises. So yeah. Until we get there, go out, do something important, and take care of yourselves. When I have had people look over this essay, the most consistent criticism that I received is, what is the implication? And here at the end, I'll spell it out. If you are willing to wait for someone to come to harm before rendering aid, then definitionally you are choosing to let them come to harm. You are choosing not to act. It is a choice that you are making. If we are talking about a demographic of people, and we are talking about a demographic of people here, then you are choosing to let those people come to harm. Vitally, that is true whether or not you have the power to prevent them from coming to harm. You are choosing not to act. You are making that choice. The second invocation, do you remember the implication, is a reminder and an elaboration. I let it be an assumption in the first part that the violence was presumed, was hypothetical, but I think that I proved in the third part that the violence was purposeful and deliberate and planned. What I would hope is that reminding you that the fascists don't want you to take their threats of violence seriously, right before reminding you that they have argued you to the point where you have chosen not to act, would explain, without words, that they are doing it on purpose. They are constructing their arguments in such a way as to prevent you from being willing to stop them, to give them more time and space to do the violence that they consider necessary. It is not an accident, it is not a coincidence, it is purposeful and deliberate. The very last deception is the same as the first. The fascists doing the fascist violence want you to choose not to act. And the implication at the end is that you are doing exactly what they want. I did not record the first 3 takes of that. Oh my god, someone's gonna call the cops.